Hello again, and welcome once more to Denton's Tales. The Assimilation of the Old Norse. Now, the dictionary definition of assimilation is the absorption and integration of people, ideas, or culture into a wider society or culture. And I call this video the Assimilation of the Old Norse, not the Vikings. Because when that assimilation occurred, they were not Vikings. No, and they hadn't been Vikings for quite some time. Not Vikings, you say? Yes, because, you see, while all Vikings were Norse, that's an indisputable fact, not all Norse were Vikings, which I'll come to in a moment. Norse assimilation, peaceful, non-violent relations with other peoples whom they conquered or settled among, into marriage with those people, even conversion to their religion and so on, is frequently overlooked. They are seen almost exclusively as raiders, pillaging and looting, burning and raping any female who still had a pulse, and probably a few that didn't as well. We'll just move on quickly from that one. Taking barbaric cruelty to Olympian heights of diabolical lowness. Yeah, well, that's a greatly exaggerated and inaccurate view of historical fact. But what came after the looting, burning, and unwilling hanky-panky when they traded being Vikings for being settlers and colonists, setting up towns and trading, replacing the sword and the axe with the plough, the carpenter's toolbox, and the weighing scales? That is so often ignored. Yet it is every bit as important in the understanding of the people usually referred to, often incorrectly, as the Vikings. In fact, it is perhaps even more important than the legacy left to later generations by the Old Norse, because that comes not from raiding and pillaging, but rather from later peaceful settlement and trading. The effects of their warlike activities faded quickly from history. Really, nothing of that actually remains today, but their peaceful activities, well, that remained long afterwards, and in many cases still being with us today, thanks to assimilation in the form of towns they founded or words in both English and Irish. Over 50 words in English are actually from Old Norse, including anger, fog, gift, hit, mistake, saga, same, husband, and ransack, for example. And many supposedly Irish surnames are either of Norse origin or they represent Irish descriptive names for them. Now, of course, the Norse themselves had no, had no hereditary surnames until late in the 18th century. In the Viking Age, a surname was simply your father's name with son or daughter added onto it, and that's known as patronymics. For example, the very famous Viking Eric the Red had two children, a son named Leif and a daughter, Frøydis, their surnames being Eriksson and Eriksdottir, respectively, which is a naming system still used in Iceland and in the Faroe Islands, which is rather nice, I think. Irish names with Norse connections include MacBurney, which comes from the son of Bjorn, MacManus, the son of Magnus, MacAuliffe, son of Olaf, or Reynolds, which comes from Ragnar. Then we find descriptive names. An example would be Doyle, coming from the Irish Dove Dark and Gael Foreigner, meaning the son of the dark foreigner, or in other words, the son of a Dane. Norwegians being referred to as the fair foreigners. Any name ending in son is probably of Norse origin, as are, and now this may be quite a surprising little list: Magna, Halpin, Broderick, Coppinger, Grimes, Harold, Cotter, Trant, Crangle, Braniff, Hewson, Kenrick, Kett, Kirby, Broder, Gaynor, Boland, Crosby, Rourke, Handrick and Hendrick, Stoney, Tuke, Thunder, Harford, Grimes, Killen, and Dromgoole. That's quite a list, but all of those Irish names actually stem from the Norse. Town names that end in Ford, indicate a Norse origin from the word fjord, meaning an inlet. Waterford, Carlingford, Strangford, Wexford, for example. And the County Dublin coastal town of Skerries takes its name from the Old Norse skir, meaning a rock in the sea. There's a rocky outcrop out into the sea right beside the town. So the Norse are still very much with us today in Ireland. Many things commonly thought of as Irish actually having their origins in Scandinavia. The same in Britain. I mean, any town with a name ending in B or Thorpe was founded by the Norse, Whitby or Scunthorpe, for example. If you take a close look at their assimilation with peoples whose lands they settled in, now admittedly after fighting their way in to begin with in most cases, you find the supposed Norse hatred of Christians is actually a total myth, demonstrated, well, particularly here in Ireland. You know, if you truly hate someone and you despise their beliefs, you want to wipe those beliefs off the face of the map, well, now, I mean, you may kill them. That would certainly achieve the wiping off the face of the map part of it. Or you may use them as slaves, because after all, you're going to look down on them, so they're only worthy to be slaves, right? But you don't settle down happily amongst them and marry them. Nor do you convert to those very religious beliefs you are supposed to detest. Why would you do that? But you see, strictly speaking, of course, it wasn't the Vikings who assimilated. It was the Norse, since all Vikings were Norse and not all Norse were Vikings, as I said. And of course, it was not the Vikings who did the assimilating. It was the Norse. Now, when they arrived as raiders, they were Vikings. Yes, because Vikinger in Old Norse meant someone who went off in a ship to somewhere else and did something. Til fara I Vikinger, to go Viking. But those who settled down in foreign lands and assimilated, they were not arriving in ships waving axes. They were no longer Vikings. They were, well, settlers, colonists, foreign residents, townspeople from somewhere else who were now living here. But Vikings, they were not. To be a Viking, you needed a ship, somewhere to go in it, and something to do when you got there. No, the people who were assimilating, they were simply Danes, Norwegians, or Swedes who were living somewhere else. Even if they fought against local native Irish tribes, they were still not Vikings. No ships were involved. They hadn't just come from somewhere else. They were now townspeople defending their property. Strictly speaking, when Norsemen fought each other in land battles back home in Scandinavia, and oh yes, they did quite a lot of that, they weren't Vikings either, since they hadn't gone anywhere else in a ship to do it. They were not Vikings. They were just Norsemen beating the crap out of each other. Real Vikings, and arriving in ships, fighting their way in to begin with, genuine Vikings, well, they began to set up camps here in Ireland in the winter of 840 to 841 AD, these later becoming Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, Cork, Wicklow, Carlingford and Carlow. But before too long, Norse settlement began to replace raiding, with trading and even alliances with the native Irish becoming more frequent as time went on. Increasing intimacy with the native Irish soon began producing, well, romantic relationships. Marriages followed, and mixed-race babies began popping out all over the place. No racial prejudice among the Norse settlers, nor among the native Irish, it would seem. As early as the first decade of the 11th century, the joining of Norse and Gael had become so established that the majority of the Dublin Norse, or Norse Gaels we could call them, were actually Christians. At the time of the famous Battle of Clontarf in 1014 AD, the King of Dyflin, as Dublin was known back then, well, he was the son of a Norse nobleman and an Irish princess, which was a very common thing at that time. And he was also a Christian who founded Christ Church Cathedral. That, of course, makes quite a contrast with what Irish schoolchildren were always taught, that the saintly King Brian Boru drove the evil pagans out of Ireland. Oh, yes, he threw those heathens, those terrible pagans, drove them from the holy land of Erin. Yeah, well, whereas, in fact, he would have had a job to find very many pagans by that time. And his intention was to take the kingdom of Dyflin for himself rather than drive anybody out of anywhere. He didn't really care who was running Dyflin. He wanted it. But certainly driving out pagans would have been really on a par with the labours of Hercules. There would have had to have been some pagans there for him to drive out, which there weren't, so he didn't. So much for school history. Norse acceptance of other people is shown very clearly by intermarriage. Something you don't do with, supposedly inferior people you have no respect for, or by conversion to other religious beliefs. Again, something you don't do if that belief is a thing you wish to destroy. You may want to get rid of it, but you certainly don't adopt it for yourself. The Old Norse were far more accepting and tolerant than the great colonial empires of the 18th and early 20th centuries, when any intimate integration of Europeans with mere natives was unthinkable. God, yeah, well, good heavens, old chap, one couldn't marry a native any more than one could marry one's horse, could one? I mean, no, the very foundations of the empire would crumble. No, you couldn't have that sort of thing going on. No, none of that. Yes. The Norse had no such prejudices. Nor were there any cases, of course, of Europeans converting to native pagan beliefs. Good heavens, I mean, perish the thought, old chap, Where, again, of course, the Norse settlers were quite happy to convert to Christianity. And eventually they became indistinguishable from the native Irish. By the time the Normans arrived in the 12th century, they couldn't really have told the difference. So I think the willing assimilation and religious tolerance of the Old Norse, their settling, exploring, trading, and their influence across Europe should be remembered at least equally with their more brutal beginnings. And their brutality was hardly any worse than that of many others of their day. Everybody was pretty brutal at that time, but you see, they were pagans being written about by Christians. Yes, so of course they were automatically the servants of Satan and evil beyond imagination. Oh, so evil. Yes. You see, it was monks and priests who were writing about them, since they were the only ones usually able to read and write in those times. And of course, their churches and monasteries were the principal targets of the Viking raiders, since the Norse did have a habit of looting and burning churches, because that's where all the money happened to be at the time. So, getting monks and priests to write about the Norse or the Vikings, whichever you want to call them, it was a bit like expecting a sheep to write a fair, unbiased account of a wolf pack. Exceedingly unlikely to happen. Much of Old Norse culture was extremely admirable, I think. Their cleanliness, for example. Though a popular image of Vikings would be scruffy men with unkempt hair and beards, nothing could actually be further from the truth. In an age where bathing was often an annual event, maybe twice a year for the real clean freaks, the Norse washed their hands and faces and combed their hair every day. They changed their clothes regularly, and they had a bath every Saturday. That day known as Lorgada, which means a pool or a bath day. A weekly bath? A weekly bath? Well, that was an unheard of thing, but it astonished the Anglo-Saxons. And there is even one Saxon account of them wanting to kill the Norsemen because they were so clean and well groomed that Saxon women were becoming attracted to them. Yes, one can't really wonder why, can you? You see, the Saxons, they feared losing their women to the Northmen. Now, that says a great deal about the personal state of the Anglo-Saxons, and we have it on the authority of an English monk and chronicler named John of Wallingford, who was writing in 1002 AD. And he wrote about the Norsemen that, and I quote, caused much trouble to the natives of the land, for they were wont, after the fashion of their country, to comb their hair every day, to bathe every Saturday, to change their garments often, and to set off their persons by many frivolous devices. In this manner they laid siege to the virtue of the married woman, and they persuaded the daughters even of the nobles to be their concubines. Yes, of course the answer to the problem was rather obvious. I suppose take a bath more than once a year and comb your hair occasionally. Smelling like a pigsty on a hot day is a guaranteed passion killer. Oh yes, trust me on that one. Nothing romantic is going to happen. Some of the most common items found in Scandinavian graves are various types of comb. As a matter of fact, this type of comb, a dust comb, I think it's called today, is exactly the same as the Norse combs of over 1,000 years ago. Tweezers, earwax removing tools. So much of what we find in graves from that time relates to grooming, to cleanliness, hygiene, and so forth. So a real Viking would have been well-dressed, clean, well-groomed, and rather more pleasant to be with in a confined space on a hot day than would many others of that time. Oh, yes. Those Anglo-Saxon women knew a thing or two, or at least their sense of smell was working quite well. On that note, I shall end this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and all the best until the next time. So I shall say, farewell, goodbye for now.